student has told me there is no freedom of speech. You have to be quote-unquote responsible with what you say. And in university campuses, responsible is defined as speaking in terms of political correctness. So Canadians are a little different than the United States, especially young Canadians. I would say a lot of young Canadians have bought the Socialist Party line, and they actually support speech restrictions.
How long, what's the history of freedom of speech in Canada? I know in the United States it started in 1620.
Well, I remember as a kid in the 1960s and 70s, well, I was born 67, so I guess I don't remember that far back, but certainly the 60s and 80s, I would say that our freedom of speech up here was certainly robust and equal to the United States. We go more from a British tradition, and certainly, I think there is the Englishman's Bill of Rights, the Magna Carta, different things like that certainly had freedom of speech. That was a big issue in
people in Canada still say they like freedom of speech?
Well, that's what I'm finding. If you talk to a 40-year-old welder, they will say they like freedom of speech. On more than one occasion, and I've noticed this more so in the last 10 years, I didn't notice this. I've been in the pro-life movement fighting this battle for about 20 years or more, and I certainly think there was a lot of regard for freedom of speech 20 years ago. But amongst the 19, 20, 21-year-olds, increasingly, I'm finding that they don't make a pretense. They really believe, and I think they get it from their universities and increasingly from our media. They really believe that freedom of speech should not be absolute. There's a very, very widespread belief in this country now that you should be able to debate a matter of politics, but if you criticize sexual behavior, the state has an interest in suppressing that kind of speech because it's considered hate speech. And also, if you try to bring up immigration or if you notice there's an increase in crime amongst a certain ethnic or racial group, people really believe, even if your facts are correct, that the state should punish you if you express those types of views in this country.
Well, we're sure getting close to that here. Moving in that.
Oh yeah, it's a little harder because of your constitution, but I see the difference in your country, and I guess you can look here to kind of see where Obama's taking you.
Do you know about the John Peter Zenger case back in the 1720s? It established freedom of speech or freedom of press here in the United States. The king's the English king had appointed the New York governor. John Peter Zenger was a newspaper man, and he had really blistering accusations against the governor. And of course, it wasn't free speech in those days. So the defense was that they ought to be able to say what was true. And the prosecution said, well, we're accusing you of libel, and it's not a defense to libel that it was true. Doesn't matter if it was true. If it's true, it's still libel. And so the judge would not allow the defense to present evidence that it was that what John said was true about the governor, but the judge would allow them to challenge the judge's interpretation of the law, which courts won't do in America today. And so the defense said, since we can't present evidence that it's true, here's how you know it's true. Suppression of the evidence is always the strongest possible evidence.
Oh yeah.
That seems like an important argument today.
Well, in Canada, they did allow me to present my evidence, and certainly in my mind it was irrefutable. But in Canada, we got a concept, and there's certainly elements in the media that are both for and against it. I guess it is controversial. The more left-wing media tends to actually support the concept. Canada's media, none of it's very conservative, but I guess we got a little bit of media that might get somewhere close to Fox News. Nothing that's a strong defense of Christianity, but sort of libertarian. They actually have problems with it. But in Canada, it's pretty much affirmed in my case that truth is not a defense in what's called human rights cases. In human rights cases, if I'm trying to promote, some kind of hatred, if I'm a neo-Nazi and I'm denying the Holocaust and I get a whole bunch of evidence that the Holocaust never happened, or if I'm a Christian and I agree that sodomy
They actually spell that out, huh?
Oh yeah, it's explicit. You can read 110 pages of my court ruling, and that comes up, I think, in the first 3 pages. You don't have to go very far. You get that in about 5 minutes of reading it. It's explicit, unambiguous. I can almost quote it verbatim. The judge says, in the human rights perspective, truth is not a defense, and not all truthful statements shall be free from prescription or proscription. I believe that that's just about what Judge Rothstein said verbatim. Unambiguous.
Wow. I can't even... We haven't come close... We haven't come close enough to that kind of legal reasoning here in the United States for me to have even thought about how to respond to logic gone that far astray.
Yeah, well, that's the highest court in the land. So that is the law of the land from coast to coast to coast.
How do you answer that?
Well, I was actually depressed. I'm not suicidal, but really depressed. And thinking that I've lost in this country. Because really, I took that case with the desire to enhance freedom of speech in this country and to fight for, particularly the right for Christians to speak freely. The Human Rights Commissions and their persecution of Christians, and believe me, Christians make up a disproportionate number of so-called human rights cases. I never saw a sodomite go in front of a Human Rights Commission for hate speech, and they got lots of it. And I've never even heard of a Muslim going there. It just seems to be neo-Nazis and evangelical Christians and the odd Roman Catholic that winds up there. So with that, I was kind of bothered, and I put out those flyers knowing I was going to get into a fight with the Human Rights Commission, and my lawyer, who is a fine conservative Roman Catholic, believed that we had a good chance of winning it, and we did win in the Court of Appeals, and it seemed everyone thought we were going to win in the Supreme Court. So I really thought I was going to bring Canada a little closer to the United States and allowing robust freedom of speech. When I lost in the Supreme Court of Canada, didn't have anywhere else to appeal to, I just think Canada is firmly entrenched with Sweden and West Germany and Holland and England, that we went on that path. And I don't know that there's any more hope. The only thing left to do is go to jail and lose all my well, I don't have any property, I already lost that. But lose my paycheck, I suppose. That's the only thing left that they can take.
I guess my one answer that occurs to me is, if government is now suppressing truth, then what is government protecting but lies? Is that what is?
They're protecting lies. They're protecting the homosexual lifestyle. That's what they're protecting. And of course, to protect that is a lie.
It's another way of saying law is explicitly, deliberately out of touch with reality and determined to remain so.
Yeah. That is not too strong of a statement. You're right. They aren't using truth or reason. They're using judicial power and making up a few excuses to suppress what is true.
Now, perhaps they think that passing a law that is out of touch with reality can somehow change reality.
Yeah, I don't know if they believe that or if they just prefer to lie. Like I said, some of the ruling was nutty, and I mean that literally. I don't mean that just because I'm on the losing end of it. They said that my speech was preventing homosexuals in Canada from participating in democracy. So by suppressing my speech, they're actually protecting democracy. That's explicit, somewhere around page 5 or 6. Now, of course, I've been putting out flyers on homosexuality since 2000. And, it took them until 2013 links for more than 30 seconds, they know it's utter rubbish that my flyers have prevented this so-called vulnerable group from participating in the democratic process. And then they said that my flyers are potentially leading to violence. And I guess that's somewhat true. All of the violence is directed at me, of course. People get offended at my flyers and try to punch me out or vandalize my car. But I don't know of a single homosexual that got exposed to violence because of my flyers. And then the judge said in extreme cases, my speech could lead to genocide. And yes, that's verbatim in my Supreme Court of Canada ruling that my flyers criticizing sodomy and offering Jesus Christ could potentially lead to genocide. And then after all that nutty stuff, they talked about evidence of harm, and they said that they don't actually need evidence of harm, and this is explicit, it's not implied. They explicitly say they don't need hard evidence of harm because a reasonable person can understand these assertions are so. So actually, these here judges know they don't have evidence of genocide. They know they don't have hard evidence that queers can't participate in democracy. And in fact, if you turn on the news for more than a day, you'll see some queer participating in the political process, that's for sure. So what they said is a reasonable person can apprehend that, and that they can silence my speech as a preventive measure. And so, of course, this really doesn't only apply to me. Any Canadian who wants to speak can be silenced as a preventive measure because a reasonable person understands criticizing the gay lifestyle leads to violence and genocide.
Yeah, we're still here. You left us speechless.
Yes, you did.
Yeah, well, that's exactly how the Supreme Court of Canada wants to leave me.
Yeah.
Anyway, you did see my latest story of what's happening in Saskatoon, where shop owners that are run by normal people are now being forced to cater to transgenders. And I am thinking about defying this order that I just described to you and putting out another 5,000 flyers on it.
I want to ask you about a theory I have. It's that when the apostles went out preaching the gospel 2,000 years ago, went to a huge city, and I imagine the media of that day turned on them like they turned on you and me and distorted what their real message was, made it into something that was much harder to defend, and I imagine this media machine announced that these wicked people were here to the whole culture, and there was probably several people throughout the culture that had figured out that their culture lies to them, who were curious who these new people were that were offending the culture, and went to the source. And then, so potentially, according to my theory, there's a movement might begin to grow if the message is pure and righteous enough and correct enough. The trouble with my theory is I've seen a lot of real good messages being given, and I haven't seen any movements growing.
Well, I think Scripture would support what you actually observe. It seems that in John chapter 3, I believe it is, the Word of God says the people prefer darkness. And yeah, that's what I'm seeing. The harm and sexual deviance and abortion, because when they present evidence of the humanity of the unborn child, you can present really good hard evidence that chastity until marriage, infidelity number of Canadians today. And then, yeah, I did haul off and punch him in the mouth when he spit in my face.
Yeah, I remember you reading your article about that. I guess I left a comment about that after that article too. That was just recent, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was about a month ago, and really that guy's response to me wasn't out of sync. That was the general response of just about everyone on that campus. There were some people who took my flyers who did express themselves, so I don't know which way they were going. But pretty close to 90% of the people who did respond, it was all hostility. It was vulgar language, spitting, name calling, and there was nothing false in my flyers. So I certainly don't see a big movement rising up in this country to defend the sanctity of marriage or the sanctity of life, even though such concepts are rooted in truth. So I don't think Canadians really want the truth, and those who believe in the truth don't really want to go out there and sacrifice themselves for it.
You had a conference recently, presumably with supporters. Did very many people come?
We did, yeah.
Many? Yeah.
Oh, that was, I guess, a decent enough turnout, given the times we're in. It certainly wasn't a groundswell. But there was about 250 people.
Wow.
Many of them are sworn non-activists, but I guess they're pro-life, so they came to listen to the speakers. I think a whole lot of them are not going to hit the streets anytime soon. There's some really good information there that I certainly benefited from.
You were one of the speakers?
No, I'm too controversial for that.
Oh.
They're never going to have me as a speaker.
Oh, I had the impression it was organized by you or something.
Oh, hell no. No. When I organized the protest at the University of Saskatchewan, and I managed raising up 5 people. That was at PLA, which has the Saskatchewan Pro-Life Association. They got about $250,000 budget and a little more of a following than I do. So, I was just there, and we were pro-life. I'm a board member there, and they asked me to take some photographs of the event. So, I'm happy with that. I don't need to be in charge of anything like that.
In my case, for about the last 20 years, I've been analyzing the American law. By the way, how do Canadians feel when people of the United States refer to the United States as America?
I don't think Canadians care really very much how you guys refer to yourself. We're all part of the continent, North America. And, there's some Canadians, and I would say they're a minority, that are left-wing, that are fashionably anti-American, and seem to prefer Hugo Chavez and Fidel Castro. And they get a disproportionate amount of media coverage because of my travels. The anti-American Canadians that are far left are probably 10% of the country tops. And then I believe the other 90% or at least 70% are strongly pro-American. And then there might be 20% that are somewhere in between, I think Canadians pretty much view America as our best friend, even with Obama there.
So anyway, as I was saying, for the last 20 years I've been analyzing what American law says about the situation where an abortionist is killing lots of people and then someone goes in and physically stops him, which the media, of course, characterizes as murdering doctors. And American law, we have a necessity defense. I imagine you surely must have something like that in Canada.
Wait,
It isn't as robust.
what?
It is where you are. Like Zimmerman would have been convicted and sent down the pike the first time in Canada.
Well, anyway, necessity. I mean, we've had state Supreme Courts universally agree that the necessity defense shouldn't apply to stopping abortion, because how can something that is constitutionally protected be a harm? So it's certainly not very robust here in that where it needs to be. But if you're not talking about abortion, then people get a little bit more normal and understand that it cannot be against the law to prevent a great harm, even if to do that you have to have commit a smaller harm. So I've.
Like Canada, there'd be no point even going there, because even on board people, we don't have the right to concealed carry. So, and in Canada, the highest court of the land has rules. The very Supreme Court that kind of sent me down the tubes, they ruled that a fetus is not a person and that's the law. That's the law of the land here. It's settled, and and therefore it's hard enough to find people to pick it. Never mind go any further than that.
Well, that's interesting. So that's something that no legal authority in the United States has dared to do, to positively assert that the unborn are not human beings. We've had all kinds of...
And that seems to be a widely held view in this country. Like when I went on that tour where that guy spit on my face, I talked to a couple guys who were quite reasonable, reasonable in the sense that they were polite and they were willing to debate rather than spit or punch or hit. And that was at the University of Alberta in particular. I debated with a biologist, so this guy is my equal in knowledge of fetal development. He did not argue brainwaves, heartbeat, or anything of that nature. He just simply told me that for the purposes of the law, and it's correct because it's a woman's choice, that a fetus is not a person until birth. It doesn't matter if you stop a heartbeat or inflict fetal pain. That's fine, because women need the choice to abort their kids. Well, he didn't use the word kids, but that was a reasonable, rational 21-year-old who argued this with me, and he was an intelligent and polite guy, and that's simply how he viewed human life.
So anyway, I've been publicly analyzing how American law, how this legal defense works. So reporters come along, and they don't report that I'm saying these things in the context of analyzing American law. They don't even report that I have an opinion about American law. They just say I'm advocating shooting doctors.
Yeah, I saw that in your emails there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they don't give us much of a fair shake here in the media either. They claim that I called all homosexuals pedophiles, and for one thing, I don't even believe that's true. I don't believe every homosexual is a pedophile. I just simply said that there's a predisposition towards that in the gay lifestyle and greater acceptance of it in the homosexual in the homosexual subculture, and that's verifiably true with hard statistics. But they just said that I call all homosexuals pedophiles, and therefore I deserve to go down the tubes. So yeah, you touched something as controversial as using force to stop abortion. I wouldn't expect the media's going to cover that in an impartial way at all.
Yeah. Lots of people who agree with me about most of this, when the subject comes up about being rejoicing, being exceeding glad when you're persecuted and people revile you and say evil things about you, these people will say, but they're not saying evil things, or they're not persecuting you for being a Christian. persecuting for you for saying these things which you didn't say. And somehow I wonder how to explain that being lied about is part of what Satan does.
Yeah, you're not alone there. There's a whole whack of Christians who look at the media caricature of me and go on that and basically disassociate themselves from me without even ever talking to me or getting my side of the story. So yeah, welcome to the club. And I guess the only thing I would say is that Christians have always been weak and reviled. I kind of wish that God gave us a few more victories on earth, but he really doesn't seem to. I guess he vindicates us in the end. And when he brings about a righteous result, whether it's ending slavery or bringing down communism in the Soviet Union, there really isn't a Christian that can actually take any kind of credit for that. You kind of see the hand of God in it, and there's just a few faithful Christians who've witnessed, against the destruction before it all comes down. Yeah, it's hard for me to be very optimistic, after this loss.
How do you feel about your prospects for victory?
In the courts, nil. I've lost. I'm finished. I'm done. In the next life to come, I don't think there's going to be much that I'm going to do right to earn it. But I think through Christ's blood and his resurrection, that I got a great hope there. But I think in spite of my sin and fallen nature, the long-term prognosis looks pretty good. In this country, I think I'll either be in jail or I'm going to have to flee it one day. It's going to be one or the other. Or else I'm going to just have to shut up and go along with the agenda. And I don't want to do that, really.
It's interesting. As costly as it has been for you, the truth still seems worth the cost. I've thought about that with...
Do anything different, even though I lost. And I don't think I could have won. I don't think I could have got a better lawyer. I don't think I could have came up with a better defense. Case law and facts were on my side, and I believe that to this day. The highest court in the land simply had to spin this lie that without any evidence, my words were going to lead to violence and segregation and genocide, and they just had to go with that fantasy and impose their punishment on me and silence my speech. So there wasn't a legal argument that we could have come up with that was going to enable us to win. The powers that be decided we were going to lose, and we're simply going to find the excuse to do. And I think if I could turn the clock back 10 years, that I would even stop with fires. Those were fires. They were based on truth. They certainly created a stir, and I think that was the right thing to do. What kind of good they've done to our culture, to individuals that have that I don't know.
Thought about how the decline of freedom of speech in our society reflects the decline or the absence of freedom of speech in our churches.
I haven't reflected on it that way, but I have seen Christianity even since I became a Christian. Because I used to be and, I certainly essentially a Christ. Political correctness in the church at that time.
have the new scrolls were found in the Qumran caves, and they found the second book of denominations that has a commandment in it, thou shalt not be controversial.
Oh, really? That's quite a commandment. That commandment is carved in stone on our university campuses. Well, actually, that isn't even true. If you want to run around naked, that's a little bit controversial. That's pretty cool. But you sure don't say something controversial in defense of heterosexual marriage or life. Just hold on. I'm gonna sign up these groceries here.
Oh, that's a good conversation. Is it?
Let me tell you how controversial I am. I don't just attack abortion and sodomy. I attack publicly the very structure of churches. I'm a descendant of Richard Warren, who sailed on the Mayflower. Went to a meeting of Mayflower descendants this afternoon, actually. And through that, I discovered that the Pilgrims basically created free speech out of Scripture through afternoon prophesying services, they call them, where everybody could speak freely. They could even, specifically, the Catechism specified they can even criticize their leaders. Of course, you got burned at the stake for doing that in England. And they could talk about political or biblical topics, and they could introduce their own topics. Now, you can't do that in any church that I know about. But you see, that was a laboratory for freedom of speech. And now, the only body that I know of in our society that has that same kind of freedom of speech for all of its members is a legislature. But of course, there you can't talk about God.
You probably could. I don't think they could drag you out in handcuffs.
Well, that's right. You're right. Yeah. So there's actually more that freedom of speech, which the Pilgrims created out of the Bible, now resides in our legislatures and is lost to our churches. And if the church...
Yeah, I don't think churches are an absolute democracy. Certainly I don't think you can burn anyone at the stake. But churches are entitled to discipline and order. I think that was always there, right back from the book of Corinthians. And if someone doesn't like it, they're just free to leave.
See, 1 Corinthians 13 is where we're told 7 times that everyone should be allowed to speak. The prophesy was the word in the King James, but the word prophesy is defined in verse 3 as to comfort or exhort or edify.
Yeah, well, yeah. It's been a while since I've looked at my Greek. I did go to a Baptist seminary, but I came out of it a Lutheran, and then moved towards more of a Catholic theology. So I'm pretty much, I used to go to the Brethrens, where people would stand up. Mind you, there was limits to what you could even say there. But I've gone to a few house churches that were free-for-alls, and they usually dissolve within a couple weeks.
Yeah.
That's the way God intends it. I don't see any good fruit coming out of that.
No, I don't either. I know. I've been to a few of those too. Problem is creating order out of Scripture. With
Scripture is orderly. St. Paul does say God is a God of order, and there's a world of difference between church discipline and secular discipline. So I certainly believe a church can be disciplined and should be disciplined, and I go to a disciplined church where a lot of people don't exactly think like me, but I go, and that keeps me from going right off the deep end, as I've seen even a few pro-life Christians do. And at the same time, I don't court judges might actually bring about the very violence that they claim they're trying to prevent by silencing me. Because there isn't going to be a peaceful recourse in this country. Once they step onto too many toes and silence too many points of view, then it'll just wind up like Iran or the former Soviet Union, a whole bunch of chaos when people say that enough is enough of this type of oppression.
That almost makes those dark days seem welcome, doesn't it?
Well, I think actually Russia is a little more free, and I think Christians have a better go of it in Russia than they do in the United States or Canada, actually.
Might be.